seems like the president keeps saying that a deal's been reached, negotiations have been successful, and then it all falls apart and we start bombing it again.
Yeah. So, how long do we have here? Because this is
We
a
got
long
as much time as
conversation.
you need.
So, I have to explain a couple of things in the background so you sort of fully appreciate, people fully appreciate what's going on here. So number one, it's a bit of a simplification, but you have two elements within the Iranian system. You have, and you sometimes hear hawkish Americans say this, that they're all crazy people. They want to bring about, the 12th Imam and the apocalypse and all that stuff.
Right.
There are people in Iran who believe that. They're also pragmatists. You've got the crazy people, you've got the pragmatists, okay? So when we struck this MOU, and really what the MOU says, and it was misrepresented more than almost anything that I've ever worked on in public life. What it says is Iran is going to open the Strait of Hormuz, the violence is going to stop, and then we're going to negotiate to see if we can come to a broader deal on the long-term nuclear issue. That's what we wanted. And what the Iranians wanted, of course, was long-term economic and sanctions relief. Now, here's the problem with where we are right now. And I guess my summary view, Joe, is that I, of course, can't predict the future. I don't know exactly where this is going to go, but I think fundamentally we are on the right trajectory. It's just going to be really messy, and there's going to be a lot of stops and starts. So what happens? The first week after we sign the MOU, we get 20 million barrels a day of oil out of the Strait of Hormuz. That's what it was before the war. The price of oil comes way down. And there are elements, the hardliners in the Iranian system kind of freak out a little bit. They're like, oh shit, did we just give away our major leverage point? Screw nuclear weapons, we just gave away the SO in this MOU. And so there was this kind of freak out in their system. So they shot at a couple ships, we responded. I think that's entirely appropriate, of course. If they're gonna shoot at ships, we are going to shoot at the people who are shooting at the ships, or we're going to destroy the facilities that they're using to shoot at ships. So that happens. Okay, and then the Iranians are like, oh, no, fine. You're right. We shouldn't have been shooting at ships. So then they come back to the table. And there's a few more days of negotiation. And then the phase that they're in right now is the hardliners have really, really reacted strongly to all the oil that's coming out of the Strait of Hormuz. And they've basically said, we're going to try to shut this thing down. We're scared about losing our leverage. Now, the pragmatists in their system are saying this was a mistake. Let's keep on talking. And again, do I know how this is ultimately going to shake out? Of course I don't. But what we're doing is a delicate diplomatic dance where we're using economic leverage points, we're using carrots and sticks, we're trying to talk to the pragmatists, and then of course when they commit acts of violence, we're responding to it. And all those things are happening simultaneously to get us on a better trajectory. Now, that said, yes, right now they're shooting right now. Last night they shot at some ships. But with all that said, is their nuclear program still destroyed? Yes. Are the straits not necessarily fully pre-war traffic, but are we getting enough oil and gas out of the Strait of Hormuz to prevent a worldwide energy crisis? Yes. And all of these things are happening in the context of the broader negotiation over the nuclear program. You never know where this is ultimately going to end up, but that's where we are. And then can I just say one other thing about this? Because there are people, you see Mike Pence, who's sort of a super hawk, my predecessor, who say this. There are people, who are super hawkish in the American system who have attacked the deal and frankly, in some ways have tried to derail the deal. And what I always say to those people is, what is your proposal? What is your actual argument? So just take the Strait of Hormuz, like the narrowest, but in some ways the most important part of this back and forth right now. Strait of Hormuz is a narrow waterway. To the extent you shut it down, you shut down 25% of the world's energy supply, okay? Joe, you could take $100,000 and go buy a bunch of drones on the black market and post yourself on an island in the Strait of Hormuz or near it, and you could fire drones at those ships, okay? Now, what does that mean? Some oil and gas is still going to get out because some ships and some ship captains are going to say, screw you. Now, the United States can help that, right? We can shoot down some of those drones. We can shoot down some of those missiles. And so we can facilitate the flow of traffic. But the people who are like, you cannot negotiate with the Iranians, the reason why that's fundamentally idiotic is because so long as you have some person who's willing to fire off a few cheap drones, you're going to have some ship captains who say, no, we're not willing to do this. So we got to kind of use all tools at our disposal. The military is one tool, but diplomacy is another tool. And I'm very frustrated by the Americans and frankly by people in other countries who are like, you cannot negotiate with the Iranians. Well, then what is your proposal to get people to stop shooting at ships in the Strait of Hormuz? You can bomb them. You can take away their radar. You can take away some of their drones and some of their missiles, but it's just too easy to fire at ships in the straits. So you've got to actually be willing to talk and to try to figure out the problem.
What is their proposal? The people that think you shouldn't negotiate with Iran.
I think that their proposal is to bomb and bomb and bomb. And the honest view, Joe, is that they do not actually have a solution. If you actually ask them, what do you want us to do? What is the goal that you're trying to achieve? You know, they'll say things like, well, just bomb them to oblivion. Okay, we can do that. We can drop a lot of bombs, but what does that accomplish if there's still a crazy person who's still unwilling to shoot a few drones at the Strait of Hormuz? What the president has done, I think very, very capably, is said, we're going to use military force in this situation when it's connected to something we're trying to achieve. So if you shoot at ships, we're going to shoot at the facilities at which you used to shoot at the ships. But we're not just going to do something open-ended indefinitely. We're not just going to bomb and bomb and bomb. We're going to try to use our military force as one of the many tools that we have to solve the problem. And obviously, like, I'm biased, but I think that's exactly the right approach. I think you have to read between the lines a little bit, because if you look at what Mike Pence or some of the conservative hawks, like people who voted for us but have been very critical of me, very critical of the administration, if you actually look at what they're proposing, they just want the military campaign to go on forever, and they can't actually identify what it is that they're trying to accomplish. None of them can identify what it is they're trying to accomplish. And I read two things between the lines. I think some of them want us to accomplish a complete change in the government of Iran, to topple the clerics and to replace those clerics with somebody who's, much friendlier. But like, look, what is our experience with doing that? It's
not
awful.
good.
It's
Yeah.
not good, right? And so, like, if the Iranian people want to rise up and change their government, that's up to them. But we're not going to send 150,000 ground troops in order to accomplish a change in a regime unless the people on the ground themselves want to accomplish that outcome. Now, we're not going to send the troops in regardless, but, like, to propose sending in the troops, you're basically saying that the U.S. military should do the job for the Iranian people. We're not in that business anymore. We're just not. And then I think a second outcome that people are, whether they're aware of it or not, is what I call the Libya outcome. So if you look at the end result of our Libya policy after Gaddafi was killed by the Obama administration, by the way, again, a very stupid decision, what happened? Libya basically turned into a failed state. You had a refugee crisis. You had people pouring into Europe, pouring into other parts of Asia, other parts of Africa. You had a lot of violence, a lot of terrorism come from that. I do think that there are people who would like that to be the outcome in Iran. But then I say, again, what is in our interest? How is it in the United States' interest to have 94 million desperate people flooding into Europe, flooding into the United States, to have sort of the terrorist infrastructure that can get established when you fan terrorists all over the world? We've run this experiment before. And so our policy right now, what we're trying to accomplish is get the straits open, ensure the free flow of oil and gas, obviously want to keep the Iranians from having a nuclear weapons program, and using the tools of diplomacy and military power to accomplish that.
And Libya failing and the collapse of Libya is a lot of what's fueled the migrant crisis in Europe as well, correct?
Exactly. That in Syria, another failed state that was created by bad Middle Eastern policy. So there is precedent for the United States doing this. Every time that it's happened, it's caused a refugee crisis, it's caused a spike in terrorism, and it's also, not incidentally, to the moral considerations, it's led to a lot of innocent civilian deaths.
ហើយសិល្បៈនៃការគ្រប់គ្រងនេះគឺក៏អាចដល់គ្រប់ពីសភៅបានដែរគឺទាមទារយើងអាសាព្យាយាមនៅក្បែរគាត់យល់ពីគាត់សួរគាត់ហើយស្ដាប់គាត់បើយើងសួរគាត់យើងស្ដាប់គាត់ថ្ងៃក្រោយគាត់ជប់ប្រាប់បាទអញ្ចឹងយើងត្រូវស្ដាប់គាត់ទោះបីយើងជាអគ្គនាយករបស់គាត់បើយើងនិយាយភាសាសាមញ្ញថាយើងមេគាត់ចោះវិញនៅក្រុមហ៊ុនណាមេកំពូលទៀតបាទ การយកមានពីរមានតែមួយក្នុង company មួយអញ្ចឹងគឺយើងមេគាត់មេធំទៀតអញ្ចឹងបើយើងទៅនិយាយមួយគាត់ពេលគាត់ភ័យគាត់ភ័យគាត់តំណាក់ក្រុមយើងពី3តំណាក់ -2 -3 គឺគាត់ងាយជួបយើងយើងទៅនិយាយមួយគាត់គឺគាត់ភ័យហើយបើយើងមិនស្ដាប់គាត់ទៀតក៏លែងហ៊ាននិយាយបណ្ដោយបាទអញ្ចឹងយើងតែទៀមទាយើងទៅស្ដាប់គាត់យល់ពីគាត់ថាតើបញ្ហាគាត់នៅកន្លែងណាតែចំណុចល្អមួយនៅពេលដែលយើងយល់គាត់យើងជួយគាត់ថ្ងៃក្រោយគាត់ហ៊ាននិយាយជាមួយយើងច្រើនអញ្ចឹងពេលហ្នឹងគឺយើងដឹងពីបញ្ហាច្រើនហើយ style ខ្ញុំមានត្រឡប់មួយដែរហើយពីច្រើនបងរបស់ខ្ញុំក៏ក្រុមគ្រួសាររបស់ខ្ញុំតែងតែធ្វើហ្នឹងដែរមិនគិតថាវាជាការគ្រប់គ្រងមួយដែលយើងគិតថារំលងអ្នកដឹកនាំក្រោមយើងទេក៏ប៉ុន្តែពេលខ្លះក៏យើងត្រូវដឹងពីអ្នកក្រោមដែរបាទព្រោះពេលខ្លះយើងមិនថាយើងមិនទុកចិត្តគាត់ទេក៏ប៉ុន្តែពេលខ្លះបើសិនជាយើងគម្លាតឆ្ងាយពេកយើងមើលតែ presentation មើលតែ report អញ្ចឹងអាចចាក់ស្ដែងវាទៅផ្សេងដែរអញ្ចឹងត្រូវការជួបដល់អ្នកក្រមតែអ្វីដែលខ្ញុំធ្វើគឺយកទៅបញ្ជាគាត់ទេគាត់យល់ពីគាត់ហើយមកប្រាប់នៅថ្នាក់លើវិញអញ្ចឹងបើសិនជាយើងនិយាយពីការដឹកនាំមនុស្សច្រើនគឺពិបាកដូចថ្ងៃនេះលោកឈុននេះពាក់ស្ដាយផ្សេងខ្ញុំពណ៌ផ្សេងអាយផ្សេងបាទអ្នកផ្សេងពាក់ផ្សេងអញ្ចឹងថាការគិតយើងខុសគ្នាបាត់ហើយអញ្ចឹងបើសិនជាយើងអាងតែយើងមេយើងគិតថាយើងត្រូវរហូតអាហ្នឹងគឺថ្ងៃក្រោយគឺគាត់ shut តែមកពេលនោះគឺយើងលែងមានការឲ្យយោបល់ដែលល្អហើយយើងមិនបានទទួលនៅយោបល់ដែលការ creativity របស់គាត់គឺយើងនឹងអាចបាត់បង់នៅពេលនោះហើយមួយទៀតនៅពេលដែលយើងគិតថាខ្លួនយើងត្រូវរហូតពេលខ្លះគាត់លែង engage ជាមួយយើងគាត់គេថាគាត់បាត់នៅអ្វីដែលជា contribution របស់គាត់ព្រោះគាត់មនុស្សយើងម្នាក់នៅពេលដែលយើងធ្វើការនៅក្នុងអង្គភាពមួយឬមួយក្នុង company មួយពេលខ្លះក៏យើងចង់បានថា this is my idea យ៉ាតែនៅពេលដែលយើងដឹកនាំណាពេលដែលគាត់បញ្ចេញ idea យើងថា is it your idea or his idea បាទពេលខ្លះអ្នកខ្លះគាត់ថាណាល្អគាត់យកណាខុសអ្នកឯងបាទហ្នឹងក៏វាជា challenge ដែរ
ថ្ងៃក្រោយឡើងនិយាយបង
បាទគាត់ហ៊ាន
បញ្ហាគាត់និយាយដែរ
បាទហ្នឹងនៅក្នុង working place គេហៅថា psychological safety ជាយើងឲ្យអ្នកមករួមការងារគ្រប់របបទាំងអស់ឲ្យគាត់មានភាពមួយគេថាសុវត្ថិភាពក្នុងការគិតនិងការបញ្ចេញមតិក្នុងការនិយាយស្ដីអញ្ចឹងបកមកលើសិល្បៈនៃការគ្រប់គ្រងនេះគឺពិបាកច្រើនតែដែលខ្ញុំបញ្ជាក់មកនេះអញ្ចឹងបើសិនជាយើងព្យាយាមនៅជាមួយវាហើយនៅក្បែរមិត្តរួមការងារយើងច្រើនហើយយកពេលវេលានេះជាការរៀនសូត្រគឺយើងចេះច្រើនមនុស្សខុសគ្នាការកាត់ខុសគ្នាតើយើងត្រូវ deal ជាមួយគាត់មិនបាទកុំថាឡើយអ្នកនេះជា head department អ្នកនោះជាគេធ្វើតែគេហៅថា supervisor ចុះក៏ប៉ុន្តែមិនប្រកាសថា head department មានកំណត់ត្រូវទាំងអស់គាត់បា supervisor ពេលខ្លះក៏ឆ្លាតដែរបាទតែគាត់ណាពេលខ្លះក៏អត់មានឱកាសក្នុងការបញ្ចេញមតិអញ្ចឹងត្រូវធ្វើម៉េចឲ្យគាត់បញ្ចេញមតិបានហើយនៅពេលដែលគាត់ទុកចិត្តយើងគាត់ហ៊ានបញ្ចេញមតិខុសត្រូវកុំប្រកាន់គាត់បើខុសយើងបញ្យល់បែបគាត់ថានេះខុសចេះហើយបើសិនជាកន្លែងនេះគាត់ប្រាប់មកវាត្រូវ 50% អូ 50% ល្អ 50% ទៀតយើងគួរកែចេះយើងគាត់ learn ជាមួយយើងជាមួយគ្នា the process of sharing ហើយក៏ជា process of learning together យើង learn ពីគាត់អើយខំថា